last bit, so if you want to do a few.
Oh, is it already recording? Is it?
It's already recording.
Okay, so I'll just give it a go, right? Okay. Hello and welcome everyone. It's great to have you here for this seminar where we will be providing you with an overview of the payment survey that we recently did across Luxembourg with the European Payment Association. We thought it was really interesting to conduct this survey in that there had been some recent interesting statistics published by the Central Bank of Luxembourg in conjunction with the EC, which was really quantitative in terms of its nature and how people make payments within Luxembourg. And we wanted to supplement that a little bit with information around how people feel about the way they make payments in Luxembourg and the different tools that are available to them. We work to ensure a very large sample of the payment survey so that it could be truly representative of the population. And quite honestly, we were pleasantly surprised with a lot of the results. Personally, I was very surprised about the level of openness to new digital innovations within payments that the Luxembourg population seemed to be happy to grasp and take hold of and work with. And their openness in particular towards a society in the future where cash ceases to exist. We have some comparable results from previous data that we've seen in Luxembourg. What was also surprising, I think, from my perspective, was the level to which the sample and the respondents were willing to embrace new methods of payments and the variety of different payment solutions they're willing to use, which are quite high relative to, say, other countries. And the fact that it does seem as though some of the new banking models, digital banks essentially, are penetrating into the Luxembourg population and ecosystem. Anyway, I don't want to spoil any of what's going to be presented, and I think it's about time I hand it over to Jerome, our Research and Strategy Manager, as well as Thibault de Barsy, the General Manager of the European Payments Association here in Luxembourg, to give you a more detailed overview. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy this.
So as mentioned by Nasir, we ran a rather large study with TNS LRS between September and October this year. We have a sample that is almost 1,200 Luxembourg residents, of which 1,029 constitute the primary sample between the ages of 18 and 65, which was then supplemented by an additional cohort above the age of 65 for certain comparisons. We designed the interview, or the survey rather, with input from the Payments Association. And with that, I leave the floor to Thibault for his introduction.
Thank you, Jerome. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, we are the Payments Association EU. And of course, what interested us was to compare the behavior and the expectations of the Luxembourg residents with the rest of Europe. And what's exciting to see is that they are very hungry about instant payments, which is definitely the #1 hot topic in Europe right now. They would like to see richer features attached to their credit cards. We'll come back to that. And most interestingly, buy now, pay later, which is not currently promoted in Luxembourg, already generates a lot of interest.
Thank you, Thibault. And so going back to what Nasir said, essentially the goal with this survey was to gain a deeper understanding of customer behavior, but also their preferences and expected future behavior. We contextualize these survey findings where relevant with prior literature, and ultimately this is designed at helping decision makers in both the public and private sector adapt their policies or offerings. Now going over key findings, security is by far the most prized attribute of any given payment option here in Luxembourg. And there are additional emphasis placed on the protection of personal data and privacy. And as you can guess, those kind of go hand in hand with the notion of security. Respondents, as Thibault mentioned, are very comfortable using a large variety of payment methods, and contactless payments have really become adopted across demographics. A cashless future has become more palpable to the population, with roughly half of the respondents saying they would be comfortable living in a cashless society, which is a major departure from results that were gathered before the pandemic. When you look at what is likely to drive future payments behavior, we found that insurance services, reward schemes, and instant payments are the three main drivers of future payments behavior. And we also asked people about some advanced concepts, such as embedded and frictionless payments. And there's nascent interest, but it is also tied to the level of comfort that people have with more advanced or new solutions, such as those provided by neobanks. That being said, the status quo in Luxembourg is that nearly half of respondents have multiple traditional bank accounts. A third of respondents also have one or several foreign bank accounts, and 1 out of 10 respondents is a frequent or regular user of neobank services. And when you look at what drives neobank use, it correlates quite nicely with higher education levels and income.
What's interesting as well is that we know that most neobanks start with the payment services as their first product, basically a current account and a virtual or a physical credit card associated to it. But what we see here as well, and this is, has been noted in a McKinsey study, is that they sometimes have trouble to sell more services and to cross-sell based on payments. McKinsey says that on average, neobanks sell 1.2 to 1.5 product per client, while of course the traditional retail banks can go to up 7 or 8 products per client. So this is perfectly reflected here.
And so if you look at, we also asked the question to respondents, basically looking at the most common payment methods and asking them, would you prefer to use either a Luxembourg traditional bank, a foreign traditional bank if you do have a foreign bank account, or your neobank if you have a neobank account? And across the board, respondents indicated that they still prefer their Luxembourg traditional bank for wire transfers, for payments at point of sale in brick and mortar businesses. And it's only with online payments that you're seeing surging interest in or surging preference towards neobanks. But having said that, you still have very, very large preponderance towards traditional banks, even when it comes to online banking or online payments.
What's very interesting to see as well is that we see that people are very comfortable to use more than 5 different payment methods according to their use and of course their preferences. 61% use more than 5. The ones that use less payment methods are obviously the households with monthly income which are in the lower range, lower than 4,000 euro per month. And for the ones that use up to 7 methods, those are, for example, obviously the ones with higher revenues, more than 8,000, and the clients of the neobanks, which obviously are very familiar with a very large mix of payment tools. What's super interesting as well is that we know that Luxembourg residents love their credit cards. We have 4.3 cards per inhabitant in Luxembourg, whether credit or debit. So this is well reflected here. Of course, the high use of wire transfer is also related to the size of the country, because we tend to use a lot of cross-border wire transfers, actually more than almost any European country. And then strangely enough, we still see that cash is kind of loved as an option by our respondents. But what I would like to note here is, of course, the very high proportion of mobile payment solutions in Luxembourg. And this is, of course, due to the historical presence of DigiCash, now Payconic, and the new kid of the block, which is Satispay. So those are all very encouraging methods in terms of maturity of our respondents. Here again, and this is the obvious result of the behavior that was observed after COVID, almost 90% of the respondents are very familiar with the contactless features, whether on their credit or on their debit card. So this is very in line in terms of dramatic evolution related to COVID with the rest of the European Union.
Yeah, and going back what was mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, so 83% of respondents told us that security is the most desirable attribute when it comes to their choice of payment methods. Privacy and protection of personal data rank second, with 56% of respondents indicating that one. And then on third spot, you have three things that are really tied, and that is ease of use, speed, and fees. And what that tells you is that while people are certainly very interested in those attributes, they are not willing to compromise security to gain faster transactions, cheaper transactions. So very strong signal there.
Another very hot topic in the payments world is strong customer authentication, because it is imposed on all the EU actors by the European Directive PSD2. So we first ask a question: how user-friendly do you think strong customer authentication is? And it's very reassuring to see that 74% of the respondents are quite okay with it, because we know that sometimes it can be perceived as cumbersome. But because we had doubts, we even asked them another question, which is, did you notice that there is a difference for a year now, because this corresponds more or less with the imposition of SCA in all EU countries. And here again, what's reassuring is that we have 31% that even find it more user-friendly versus 18%, which is, it's 24% more easy, 14% less easy. Of course, the very big debate, which will be investigated now by the European Banking Authority, is to compare if SCA has permitted a significant reduction in terms of fraud, and to compare this with the abandoned transactions online. Because we know from the merchants and from the credit card operators that they do observe a very high, a significant proportion of transactions which are abandoned as a result of SCA.
Our next section deals with where things might be headed. And again, Thibault, the floor is yours on this slide.
That's right. And this is probably one of the most interesting slides in the presentation, because we know from the worldwide and EU statistics that the way that the industry is evolving is basically we go from cash to cards, from debit card to credit card, and from credit card to mobile wallets and digital wallets. So do we see the same envy? Do we see the same hunger here? And basically it's the case, because our respondents want to use to increase their use of payment wallets, of mobile payment solutions, of their cards, but in a lesser proportion. And of course, the big loser in all that is cash. Not only, I think, as a result of COVID, but because people see the advantages and the benefits of using digital means. So here again, a very interesting result, which means that the Luxembourg residents are not conservative. They want more of their digital services.
And here you can elaborate.
Yes, here again, in terms of interest, what I would like to mention is, of course, this very strong interest of instant payments. And we know, even if the EPC has not published very detailed statistics in terms of the general use of Luxembourg versus other countries in terms of use of instant payments, we know that we are probably not ahead of most advanced EU countries, such as the Nordic countries, or even the Netherlands, which is closer to us. And I strongly believe that this is the #1 topic for the future, because once you get used to instant payment, basically you want more at the condition that it is priced at the right price. So the hunger for instant payments is super important. And then the other point is that we know that buy now, pay later, also a very recent payment method, has already gained 8% market share in terms of use in online payments in Europe. So here again, it's not promoted in Luxembourg right now, and still we see that many people would be interested in using those buy now, pay later services. Last but not least, and this is a very old method, revolving credit card still generate interest among our respondents.
Thank you very much, Thibault. We also looked at certain interesting or strong correlations between the previously mentioned attributes and different demographics within our survey sample. And so if you look at instant payments, for instance, you have 80% of neobank customers that are interested, and also 75% of those who are comfortable with a cashless society, somewhat unsurprisingly. Credit cards with insurance, we found it quite interesting that in the younger age stratum, 18 to 34, you have 72% of respondents saying they are interested in credit cards with insurance. Now, credit cards with rewards, you could think of miles and more, but you can also envision other services. The highest interest is expressed with those with higher education degrees, but also by those who are already neobank clients and the younger age groups. Credit cards with higher spending limits, somewhat unsurprisingly linked to higher income, and buy now, pay later, which Thibault just mentioned. There we see quite a strong correlation with lower incomes, lower education levels, and also with the younger age bracket. And finally, revolving credit, which is not something that has strongly penetrated the Luxembourg market. There we see the strongest interest in the younger age bracket. Going back to the question of cashless society, here we have the breakdown. As you can tell, it's basically a split. You have about 50% of respondents who say that they are favorable to a cashless society, or to pose the question properly, we asked them, can you imagine living in a cashless society? And about half said yes, they're favorable to it, about half said not interested. And what's so interesting about this is if you look back at prior studies that were conducted, for instance, by ING or by the European Commission, there has been a real shift in attitudes towards going cashless. So in 2017, the European Commission ran a very large survey as they were gauging citizens' attitudes towards the potential introduction of cash payment restrictions on an EU level. And you had almost full opposition to that. And there wasn't much variation across countries. And when you look at previous studies done by the private sector, such as the ING study, which had a pretty good sample here in Luxembourg with 500 respondents, you also only had about 28% of respondents that said they would like to go cashless. So 50% that we see now in this survey in 2021 is quite a shift. And we also asked them, what are the reasons, what reasons do you have for opposing a cashless society? We gave respondents some free input there, and then we looked at the most important trends in the answers. A lot of people mentioned that they still see cash as a necessary fallback mechanism. So that can be linked to fears of the IT systems underlying digital payments failing at some point. Equally as important is that a lot of people, or a relatively large subsample here, view privacy and protection of personal freedoms as an important attribute of cash. And last but perhaps not least is also a respondent saying that they think cash allows them to better manage their spending.
Another super interesting topic, and this is not only a buzzword, is embedded payments. Now, all the users of Uber know very much what embedded payments is. But we can see, of course, that there are a lot of other applications that are coming, because basically everyone from Netflix to car makers to retailers, of course, are very interested to embed payments into their product or service offer. And now, of course, we know that there are people who don't like that because they want to stay very conscious of what they spend, because for them it's a way to control their budget. So here again, what's super interesting is to see that we have a majority of respondents that are very or rather interested in seeing embedded payments being developed, because basically it's frictionless, it's easy, and it's convenient. So again, a very interesting trend here.
With that, a few concluding remarks. As we all know, payments are the lifeblood of the economy. What the study shows is that Luxembourg residents are very comfortable using a great array of payment options. It's basically a matter of the right tool for the right application. The survey doesn't really show us that there's a winner-takes-all situation here. Rather, we think as the LHoFT Foundation that it's important that incumbents continue to work with startups. Banks still have a significant moat in terms of the trust that consumers give them, but consumers are also increasingly interested in all kinds of advanced payment options. And so there's a very interesting opportunity in Luxembourg to integrate the security that is provided or perceived to be provided by banks with the innovation that new banks and other other disruptors, if you will, can provide to the market. And with that, we would like to turn it over to your questions, which you can and should submit via the chat.